All right, y'all. Contextualization is actually pretty simple. Let's say you run into a friend and it's your first day of ninth grade, okay? And you haven't seen them since sixth grade. And they ask you the question that everybody asks each other. Hey, what you been up to? And now remember, you haven't seen this person in 2-3 years, okay? And they ask you what you've been up to. What are you going to say to them? And don't actually give me the teenage answer. Not much. Don't do that. See, I said it ahead of a manual. What would you do? No, engineering. Come on, think, guys. If it's an introduction to you now and what you've been up to, you're going to say, okay, good, Kimura. What's been going on in life for the past few years? Now, you're probably not going to say every single day, right? You're not going to go into like, oh, I failed this test and then I got this grade in this class. That conversation would be just the worst, right? It'd be too long. It'd be too detailed. Nah, it's terrible. So what you want to do is you want to say the most pertinent details. Like, for instance, if somebody came up to me and said, after 2-3 years, I haven't seen him. Hey, Mathos, what you been up to? I'd be like, well, you give him the highlight reel. There you go, Asharia. Be like, well, we went on this really long lockdown at one point, and I had another child. Her name's Leah, and she really changed things around the household because, now I have 2 kids, and that's just crazy right there. You see what I'm doing here? I'm giving the highlight reel. 1 or 2 specifics of what happened, and then I'm expanding upon those specifics. Okay? So that is contextualization. It's kind of like relating what's happening, relating all the happenings of your life to you. You are the topic. Let's take this one step further. Let me show you what College Board defines as contextualization. On the rubric, okay, contextualization is defining as describes a broader historical context relevant to the prompt. AKA, you've got to relate the topic of the prompt, whether that's industrialization, or maybe it's the revolutions, maybe it's the Ottoman Empire, maybe it's, you go through the litany of topics that you could, or leadership in, Europe after the Crusades. And you have to sit there, relate that topic to broader historical events that occurred before, during, or after the time frame in question. So you've seen most of the prompts have some sort of date range on it. So you have to take some events that relate to your topic, okay, and expand upon them so that your topic now is kind of situated in there. So if it's talking about, if your topic of the prompt is talking about the Industrial Revolution, what events were happening directly before the Industrial Revolution that relate, okay? It's kind of like a tie-in, Kimura, yeah. Very regular English essay, except it's got to be relating to it. So like when I think about the Industrial Revolution, I start thinking about the Agricultural Revolution, which happened right before it, which made more food for people, better technology, more food, more babies, more food. Now we need better technology to keep up with this population increase. And that's how I think about the Industrial Revolution. That's my introduction, my contextualization. Let's see what Heimler has to say about this. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me make sure I'm sharing it in the right way.
Welcome back to Heimlich's History. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to get a perfect score on the dreaded document-based question, or the DBQ. Grouping the documents by category is a higher points.
Here we go. We're going to watch this part just so
I'll just be talking generally at this point and giving basic guidelines. First point, thesis, and you can earn 0 to 1 points for this. Now, your thesis is arguably one of the most important things you're going to do in this essay because it's going to organize and anticipate everything else you're going to write. So make sure you spend your time getting the thesis right. Now, in order to earn this point, the rubric says that you must write 1 or 2 sentences which are historically defensible and establishes a line of reasoning. So you won't get the point here for merely restating the prompt. Your thesis should actually be your argument in miniature. And your thesis needs to be additionally specific, which is to say you must mention specific historical evidence in your thesis. This is different.
Some of you guys are thinking, why is he making us watch thesis stuff? It's because the example he gives in here will actually help you understand contextualization.
From your English class where they want you to be sparse in your thesis and then reveal more later. Not so here. Your thesis needs to be packed tighter than a Christmas haggis. Now, let me give you a formula for doing this, and I'll show you an example of a thesis that earns the point. Here's the formula. Despite counter-argument, because evidence 1 and evidence 2, my argument. Now, the reason there's a placeholder for a counter-argument is because it'll set you up nicely for the complexity point later on. Now, let me give you an example of a thesis in this format that would earn the point. Here's the prompt from the 2019 AP World History DBQ. Evaluate the extent to which the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. Now,
remember that prompt because that's going to allow you to understand what he means by contextualization in the next part of the video.
Here's the thesis that would earn the point. Despite the argument that the arrival of the Portuguese was a fundamental change in Indian Ocean maritime trade in the 16th century, there's my counter-argument, because the Portuguese never extended their political control beyond a few ports, that's my first piece of evidence, and had to compete with Indian Ocean merchants in regional states such as the Ottoman Empire, there's evidence number 2, their arrival made a modest change at best, and there's my argument. So notice how that establishes a line of reasoning, and it is very specific. That thesis earns the point. Okay, moving down the rubric, the second point is for contextualization. And for this, you can earn between 0 and 1 point. Contextualization is there to situate your argument in the larger historical context. And the rubric tells you that you can explain the historical context before, during, or after the period of the prompt. Now, here's where I tell you that I've never scored an essay that is successfully contextualized during or after the prompt. Like, it's possible and is available to you if you want to do it, but by far the most intuitive way to earn this point is by explaining the events that occurred before the time period that you were given. Now, how far before the time period should you go? Let's go back to that Portuguese trading prompt. Now, technically speaking, the Neolithic Revolution could be linked by causation to Portuguese trading. After all, the Portuguese state and its ability to trade on the sea would never have arisen if people hadn't learned to farm 10,000 years before. But that's not the kind of context we're talking about. Look at the immediate context and go from there. In US history and European history, a good guideline is about 50 to 100 years before the timeline of your prompt. For world history, maybe 100 to 200 years depending on the prompt. So
in other words, guys, when you get to those 50, 100, 200 years, you want to stay within the time frame that the prompt is asking about. Stay within events that happen within that time frame. It makes it easier to link your contextualization to your thesis and the topic of your prompt.
In the Portuguese trading example, in order to properly contextualize, we need to know about the Indian Ocean trade before the Portuguese showed up. Also, it would be relevant to talk about specific maritime technology that enabled the Portuguese to enter the Indian Ocean trade. Now, notice that I said the word relevant. Your contextualization needs to relate to the prompt. So, technically speaking, the Crusades happened before the entry of the Portuguese into the Indian Ocean trade, but it's not really relevant. So my advice is to name 2 to 3 specific vocabulary words that occurred before the time period of the prompt, and then use 2 to 3 sentences defining those words and showing how they set the stage for your argument. And that second part is crucial. You have to draw the connection between your context and your argument. Okay, now let's get to the next part of the rubric, the evidence.
No, let's not get to that part. So, seeing as how you just saw Heimler explain it, and you've heard my sort of mini explanation, how many of you guys are thoroughly confused? Yeah, you only get the contextualization. Like he was saying, he's never seen somebody successfully contextualize what happens during the events or after the events. The best way to contextualize is to do like an introduction, like we talked about. Hey, what have you been up to the past few years? What is happening before this moment in time? What has happened before this moment in time? Okay, that is what we're looking at. You guys need to be able to contextualize. Here's your, on a timeline, imagine a timeline right here in front of my face. You know what? I could do one better. Forget that. I'm going to share the screen. Except I'm going to share this handy dandy thing. Yeah, you guys have seen this before. Here is our timeline. Here, right there. This is where topic of the prompt. That's where it is. Right here in this time frame. From 1750 to 1900. Okay, that's right here. Contextualization for what you want to do, okay, is here. You'll take events that happened right here prior to 1750 to 1900, or right around here, that relate to the topic of the prompt. This is what he means by before. So then maybe we took, you know, something that happened in the year 1600, or it could be 1700, or even 1720. All these things you can take that relate to the prompt. Now, Alyssa, I love that you think this seems hard because you're correct. It is kind of hard if you do not know your history. This is one of the points that if you have outside knowledge about these events, it gets easier. Okay, Alyssa, like this one, you do need some outside knowledge. You need to have a good working understanding of what happened in history that led to these next events. Okay, you guys follow me there? This is a skill that requires more knowledge. No, it's not like the SAQ at all. Contextualization is nothing like the SAQ, okay? It is strictly being able to talk about what happened before a certain topic and relating it to that topic. So I'm gonna get in for backup. I'm gonna call for backup. You know who I'm gonna call? Star Wars. I'm gonna call Star Wars. Star Wars. And I'll show you why. Because Star Wars is quite literally one of the better examples, not the best, but one of the best examples of contextualization. I'm sure most of you have seen Star Wars. If not, don't worry about it. You want to know why? Don't worry about it. Because this opening will tell you what's going to happen before this episode of Star Wars. The Phantom Menace. Turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. The taxation of trade routes, the outlying star system, and dispute, hoping to resolve the matter. With a deadly blockade of deadly battles, the Free Trade Coalition has stopped all shipping to the small planet of Now Congress of the ends the influence of long chain events. The Supreme Chancellor has secretly dispatched two Jedi Knights, the Guardians of Peace and Justice in the Galaxy, to settle the conflict. Now, ladies and gents, that just told you what is going to happen Okay, excuse me. That crawl, those yellow letters going up, tells you about the events that are going on in the Star Wars universe. Okay? Before the movie happens. Okay? Now, if you just read this, you'd be like, okay, I kind of know what's going on in Star Wars world. Alyssa, it's kind of like a written trailer, except a trailer for a movie tells you all about the movie. Right here, this, Alyssa, tells you what is happening in the Star Wars world before the movie starts. So as soon as the movie starts, you kind of know what's going on in the galaxy. Let's show you another example. Episode 2 of Attack on the There's unrest in the galactic center. Several thousand Philistines have declared their intentions to leave for Nova. Has made it difficult for a limited number of Jedi Knights to maintain peace and order in the galaxy. Senator Amidala, the former Queen of Blue, is returning to the galactic center to vote on the issue of creating an army of the Republic to assist the overwhelmed Jedi. Now, hopefully you guys are following along with this, but that's another example of contextualization because it tells you about what is going on in the galaxy before, okay, again, before the movie actually happens. So the first couple scenes in the movie is the senators coming together and voting on these things. So it brings you right into the movie. Shar, do not make a comment like that again if you want to stay in my class. I won't say that again. That has no bearing on what we're doing. So now, after seeing Star Wars opening crawls like that, do you guys feel like you have a better understanding of what's going on? How are we feeling? So now I'm going to do one more example for people that are maybe saying yes and not really knowing it. There's a lot of people not saying yes yet. Who likes Avatar? Not the blue people. Avatar, the Last Airbender, not the blue people.
I like Avatar.
All right. Time to bring out the big guns.
Water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, the four nations lived together in harmony. Then, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Only the Avatar, master of all four elements, could stop them. But when the world needed him most, he vanished. 100 years passed and my brother and I discovered the new Avatar, an airbender named Aang. And although his airbending skills are great, he has a lot to learn before he's ready to save anyone. But I believe Aang can save the world.
Ladies and gents, one of the best examples of contextualization is the opening to Avatar: The Last Airbender. It tells you about the world. You know about the different nations, and they used to live in harmony. But then the Fire Nation took over and attacked. And the Avatar is supposed to save us all, but he vanished. But we know these brother and sister found him, and we know from there, doesn't the first episode kind of go off of that? And it immediately picks up with what happens after they find the Avatar? That is contextualization. So after I've done all that and showed you that, I think most of you are having a better idea of what contextualization actually is. But some of you are like, well, I see what it is, but then doing it is something different. I get that. So here's what I want you guys to think about. When you're doing contextualization, take the event and what actually happened. Okay, like if your event is the Industrial Revolution, you need to think about the events that led up to the Industrial Revolution. How can we relate things to the Industrial Revolution? That is what we're needing to do with contextualization. It is a tough skill, and it's not just awarded for like 2 sentences. You got to actually get a little specific, and that's where you can just use some vocabulary words, throw them in there, make sure they're used properly, and you're going to get this point. Let me see if I can go ahead and get to your assignment so I could show you the first example. Here we go. This is what the assignment looks like that is due on Friday. All right? You are taking the document, or there's no documents with this one, excuse me. There's only prompts. So here's your prompt. You must put your contextualization statement for this prompt right here. And you do the same thing for 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, that's the assignment right there. So you'll put your answers right here in this box. So here's an example of contextualization, historical, not like anime or Star Wars, but an actual thing. So using the documents provided, evaluate the effects of various strategies implemented by the governments that promoted their own state-sponsored visions of industrialization during the period 1750 to 1900. Okay. That means this is all about the topic of this prompt is what, y'all? What is the topic of this prompt? Come on, guys. Okay. Sebastian, I see you. State-sponsored industrialization. And not only state-sponsored industrialization, but so industrialization in this period, 1750 to 1900, right? Hello, ladies, gents, where we at? Come on, y'all. This is where you participate. If not, this is going to be hopeless for some of y'all. Come on. We could do this. Let me read this off. Okay, I'll read this off to you guys. And I will go ahead and you should be able to pick out certain kind of things and references. Zoom in just a little bit for you guys. From the late 18th century to the late 19th century, the world underwent dramatic political change as traditional powers in the world fell and new powers rose to dominance. For most of the last 500 years, empires like China and the Ottomans gathered enormous power throughout the regions for their economic dominance of long-distance trade routes, and areas like Western Europe and Russia were by comparison much weaker. This all changed, however, when the Industrial Revolution began, and England was soon adopted by many countries who used it in place of historical trade routes to become new global powers. This right here is your contextualization. Okay, it acknowledges that before state-sponsored industrialization, China and the Ottomans gathered the power through long-distance trade routes, and that Western Europe and Russia were weaker. Okay, this all changed. This was changing. The world underwent dramatic political change because of this. All right, so you can see they're bringing in detail here. They're basically saying, hey, what you been up to? And they're answering with, well, dramatic political change happened. Most of the power was here, but it changed, and their power, they gathered this power because of dominance of long distance trade. However, it all changed when the Industrial Revolution happened, right? And that is the transition. This last sentence transitions you to your thesis statement. Now, I know this is not easy, ladies and gents, but let's see if we could do this with number 1. Let's try to ask the question again, and I hope more than just Sebastian will give me an answer this time. Using the documents provided, evaluate the extent to which the Industrial Revolution negatively impacted the lives of women and children in industrial societies during the 19th century. So what is the topic of our prompt? What's the topic of this prompt? Yep, the Industrial Revolution is correct. What else could be the topic of our prompt? Like, we could probably relate some things. Yeah, women and children's life in the Industrial Revolution. You're not wrong. Negative impact on women, negative. There you go. So you guys got this. Good. Okay. So you know what this is about. So now, what things that happened, use your notes. You could do a search, whatever you got to do. You got to look in your brain now. What happened before the Industrial Revolution? Okay. That relates to this topic, which is everything from the lives of women and children, the impact of the revolution on women, the Industrial Revolution. These are all things that we could relate events in the past to this prompt. Well, what things happened to lead to the Industrial Revolution? Or what about the lives of women and children? Think about 50, 100, 150 years. Yes, Bolton, good. Check the chat, y'all. Bolton, you could expand upon that. Now remember, we need to expand upon it. We need to be specific and we need to expand upon it. So this is great because you're the first one to say something and you really nailed this one for me, I think. I think you nailed it here. Many women and children didn't participate in the workforce, but with the Industrial Revolution, they included them. So how can we expand that, Bolton? Let's all work with Bolton's thing right now. Everybody drop what you were going to type. Let's work with what Bolton is saying right here. What were the lives of women and children like prior to the Industrial Revolution? Come on, fourth period. I know you have unmute buttons too. I know it's not only in the chat. Come on. Engineering, there we go. Many women stayed home doing work at home and taking care of the kids.
Before the Industrial Revolution, society tended to not let women work, and most children weren't exactly required to work or couldn't.
Where did they work though?
At home.
Well, I understand at home, but what were most people doing before the job opportunities like factories and stuff like that during the Industrial Revolution?
They were in the fields working.
Oh yeah, farm work.
Yes. Now we're getting more detailed. What about some women? There we go, Bolton. Weaving. Remember, the whole cottage industry was based upon women and their weavings and stuff like that. There we go. You see what you guys are doing here? You are building up a picture of what, if you just read the chat, you are building a picture of a world and what happened for women and children, what life was like for them before the Industrial Revolution. And all you'd have to do were to tie everything together here. You would say things like weaving and the cottage industry, or having their own small businesses, taking care of kids, working on the farm. If you include all that in your contextualization, and then say a transitional statement, something like, but with the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, opportunities for women and children to work in factories. You see what I'm saying? You would tie what life was like for women and children to what it was now going to be changed with, like the prompt says, how it negatively impacted the lives of women and children. Does that make sense, everybody? What we did with Bolton's thing there? That's what we have to do for contextualization. And this is the beauty about a DBQ again. Bolton thought about it that way. He thought about the lives of women and children. For me, I'm thinking about, I already told this to you guys, the agricultural revolution, how the increase in different farm technologies, well, guess what? When it came around, more food, more babies, more babies, more food, more babies. So prior to life, prior to all these inventions, I'm thinking about what life was like for everybody and what changed it. Now, here's the other thing. I would drop in little vocabulary words. All right, let me show you what I put. So for me, I like to focus on bringing it out a little further, and I would put a couple of vocabulary words in there like agricultural revolution and industrialization, patriarchal. But if you read it, oops, sorry. In the late 18th century, James Watt's steam engine and other technological innovations propelled England to an age of industrialization. See that? I'm trying to make it all nice, like, hey, welcome to the world of industrialization. Prior to this, though, this monumental societal change, European society was based on agriculture, and people lived their lives solely on farms and in the countryside. Society had been organized in largely patriarchal ways since the agricultural revolution thousands of years earlier, and women largely existed in ways that supported the family at home. Children supported their families by helping with the farm, and with their mothers and fathers, they largely lived a traditional agricultural existence. And as soon as that's done, I transition into my thesis. The Industrial Revolution, although the Industrial Revolution positively impacted women and children by providing them, ways to contribute to the family financially, it also negatively affected them by forcing them to work in unsafe, unsanitary, and dangerous working conditions. You see the transition? Context into thesis. You guys can do this. You just did it in the chat. right? All of you guys can do this. You have the ability to. Whew. I know. It's a little intimidating. And Bolton, yes, all that would be the first paragraph of a full DBQ. A full DBQ, your first and opening paragraph is always contextualization, thesis. Okay? That is what I want you guys to do. And I'm gonna stop my recording here because I think I can't say anything else. And if I keep talking, I'm just gonna screw it up. So